parents should always be super influential. They're the ones who pass on values. They're the ones that communicate through their actions and spoken and non-spoken words what really matters to them, and therefore what matters to the kids.
I think a lot of times as parents, we try to find things that bring success for our kids. But what if the most important thing towards success is actually us, and it's no parenting hack that we could ever find? That's what some new data is showing, and Dr. Kathy has some great insights and inspiration for us to be maybe a little bit more involved, or maybe just conscious of our involvement and what it does to our kids. So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, the recent unveiling of national reading and math scores has revealed some really disheartening trends, and we've talked about them here on the podcast. It's really highlighted maybe a little bit of a main headline that would say that students are doing worse than before the pandemic started. The factors behind the continued dip in scores are really multi-layered, but teachers might tell you that the key reason why some students aren't making progress is that parents aren't making schoolwork a priority at home. According to 700 elementary and middle school teachers that were surveyed by the group study.com, an online learning platform, they queried educators in January about student achievement, and 46% of teachers surveyed named a lack of family prioritization of academics as the primary reason why some students are really falling behind. Teachers also identified parents as the biggest potential buoy to students' progress, with 87% saying that increasing support for families and parents would have the greatest impact on students' test scores. Dr. Kathy, I kind of want to ask you, why are parents so pivotal with what happens in the classroom?
I love that question because parents should always be a child's most significant influence, right? I mean, the family was ordained by God. The parents that every child has are the parents the child is supposed to have, and the children are the children the parents are supposed to have. It's a done deal, right? Whether through birth, fostering, or adopting. And so parents should always be super influential. They're the ones who pass on values. They're the ones that communicate through their actions and spoken and non-spoken words what really matters to them, and therefore what matters to the kids. The role that dads play, there's solid evidence that suggests that if dads don't read, little boys don't think reading matters. That's a very specific influence that especially the dad or the grandfather can have. So yeah, pivotal. I love this research finding that doesn't surprise me at all, that says that parents need to get on board with what the goals are that the school has, if they're, again, in a good school, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I think that that's really important to maybe highlight a little bit. If the school's strong, right? If the school's good and they're teaching really truth, then, parents can really naturally get behind it. But I think that as we look at school progress, but I think as we look at student kind of test scores and things of that nature, it's really a progress and maybe even a benchmark in development. It's kind of an indicator that if our students are really doing well or they're not doing well. But I want to beg that question a little bit, because a lot of times we look at school test scores and say that, it's a sign that this culture or this group of students is really doing well in life. Is school progress or success really an accurate benchmark for how kids are doing? Or what other benchmarks should we really be mindful of if school progress isn't that?
Yeah, I love the way you worded that. Certainly, school progress is an important benchmark. Schooling does change lives. We know that. Being interested in learning, being curious, being open to other people's insights, all of those things matter greatly in the kind of a mature life that we grow into. So yes, learning is critically important. This is why parents need to get involved and need to ask questions if their children are consistently not doing well. What could I be doing differently as a mom? And there are other benchmarks. There's athletics, which some people would say is not a part of school. I actually think it is, but intramural or competitive athletics, dance, which was a big part of my upbringing, music, another big part of my upbringing, service. Like I would say, if a child is a BC student and is a great servant, like just volunteers constantly and is the one that the youth pastor wants to have on a leadership team, like A+ that, right? Like that's huge. So academic success, artistic, athletic success, musical success, service, character. Why do we talk about that here a lot? Because character is really what's going to trump everything. Kids who are BC students with biblical character will always achieve a great possibility. So, yeah, let's not look just at school. And when we do look at the school benchmark, let's look at not just the grade, but what did they learn, right? Did they learn a lot and earn a B? I'd rather have that than a kid who earned an A because they knew how to play the game, but they have no memory of anything they've learned. That kid's going to struggle in the next year or two when the teachers expect old learning to be still in their brain.
Dr. Kathy, I love that you kind of brought that up because there is a reality, I think, for many of us that we look at school as a place where we go to get grades. And I want to ask you this a little bit. When we look at even, I would say, encouraging our students and our kids as they're maybe in school or maybe kind of in homeschool even, there's a natural push for us to push them to that benchmark that, if you got an A, now you know the material. But I've found in my own life that sometimes I get a B or a C because I'm not really good at, you know, completing the test or maybe even like citing my sources correctly, but I did it. I cited the sources. It just wasn't the way that the teacher wanted, but I've learned a ton in the process. And so what should be a little bit of our attitude or posture with like grades and progress and some of these benchmarks that we do? I think that we put a lot of emphasis on this, on schools, performing well. And the way that we know a school is performing well is based on their test scores. But is that the primary marker that we should look at for our students in our schools as we're, assessing if they're doing something? Should we care about them learning or that they got to play the game of school and they're really good at doing it? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm always going to go for learning. That's one of the reasons I'm a fan of homeschooling because we don't have to test as much. When I was a professor, some of you might remember me saying that I only gave one quiz and one test in the first semester that I taught, and then I never tested again. Now I had the freedom to not test. Today's teachers are under the gun by parents. They want testing to prove that the student has learned something. But I feel like testing is short circuits the learning system. I did not want my students to read the textbook or listen to me to earn an A. I wanted them to read the textbook and listen to me so that in 2 years, they could successfully do what I was teaching them to do. And I know that the application of truth, which is wisdom, is much more important than filling out the blanks on a test. I was not a good test taker. I had to really work hard when I was a PhD student to, if you will, play the game called school. I have always been much more interested in what's the proof that you were in the class? What did you learn about yourself and the way the world works? And can you prove it? Can you prove it's important? And some kids can't prove it in the school way, but they can prove it in maybe a life way. I think it's important to talk to our kids. Are you satisfied? Are you scared or embarrassed? Are you frustrated? Would you like some help? What kind of help do you think you could benefit from? I think those kinds of conversations could be a real blessing.
I love that, Dr. Kathy. I think that, aligns with even my experience as a young man, that there's a lot of things that I learned in life that necessarily didn't add up on the test, of life. I lose a job, but man, I've learned a lot in losing that job, and so I think that even walking our kids to that point can be really helpful. And it kind of goes to this idea that you have taught a lot about, this idea of the smarts and having different smarts and having this smart of people smarts or, other, nature smarts or music smarts that might not necessarily match up with some of these benchmarks that we kind of put on society that our kids are doing well. You talk a lot about the school smarts when you teach on the eighth grade smarts. Can you maybe explain what the school smarts are and why they are smarts that we really should be working with our kids to develop?
That's a great question in light of this research, which is about, parental involvement. So yeah, of the 8 smarts, there's 2 that we've labeled as school smarts, and that would be word and logic. When we're in the word smart part of our brain, we're thinking with words. We read, write, speak, and listen. And when we're in the logic smart part of our brain, we're thinking a cause effect, comparison, contrast, sequence, true, false. The logic, faithfulness part of the brain, if you will, math and science would be the academic disciplines we might most logically think of when we talk about being logic smart. And I call those school smarts because what do we do all day in school? Read, write, speak, listen, and ask and answer questions. And so children without as many brain cells in those 2 parts of the brain are still smart in really significant ways. However, they may find school more challenging and disengaging, and they may not be able to prove how well it is that they comprehended something. So for the parental role, to work on reading, like read to your children and read to your children and keep reading to your children and write back and forth, and take them to museums and go on field trips and think logically about the current events that are going on and, grandma's illness and what would be a proper response to that so that your kids become more aware of, oh, that's supposed to make sense, right? And then you can talk about how illogical some things are. Like quicksand is actually slow. And when your alarm clock goes off, it goes on, And when logic smart people hear you say that, they're just going to have this look on their face like, Mommy, I've always thought that that's just ridiculous. Thank you for telling me that I'm okay that I think it's ridiculous. Like, that's a fun way to show kids, no, you are logic smart. You've always thought that that's illogical. Now take that ability and do it in math class, at 10 o'clock in the morning.
What Dr. Kathy and I talked about this week is really important. It reminds me of a passage that comes out of Hebrews chapter 11. I'll begin reading at verse 23. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw he was no ordinary child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the glory of fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. The story of Moses is really powerful. Jochebed, that's the mother of Moses, she refused to submit to Pharaoh's decree that all Hebrew baby boys be killed. She hid him for 3 months and then placed him in a basket in the Nile, trusting that God would protect him. Pharaoh's daughter found him and adopted Moses, unknowingly hired Moses' mother as a nurse. During these formative years, Moses' mother instilled faith in him before he was raised in Pharaoh's palace. This early foundation really later set Moses on a trajectory to reject Egypt's paganism and embrace God's calling to lead Israel. Moses' mom risked everything to ensure that Moses was raised with the knowledge of God. This faith that she instilled in Moses stayed with him, even years and years after his Egyptian royal upbringing. So I think it's important for us to raise our kids in faith, knowing that that faith may require courage later on down the road, especially in a culture that really does oppose biblical values, but even opposes God in general. Trust God that these faith seeds that you're planting in your kids now will really bear fruit, even if there's a long-term gap before it really becomes evident. Having the conviction that God is doing something, even if it's minuscule, can be a bright light for us as parents. But more importantly, having us involved in our kids' lives to work to instill faith in them can be a bright light for them that there is somebody that's fighting against the darkness that they might see all around them or they might feel internally, but they are too afraid to acknowledge or let other people know. I hope that's an encouragement for you, and I hope this whole podcast is an encouragement for you. Thanks so much for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast, this daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender. Thanks for listening, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.